Hi, everyone. So as Van said, I'll be giving you a summary of the current state of scientific research on the environmental impacts of cannabis. So recent years have seen an increase in initiatives to legalize and decriminalize cannabis at national and local levels. Some notable examples here include Uruguay and Canada as the first countries to fully legalize cannabis, and of course, many US states like California. As markets expand in response to this and policymakers seek to regulate the sector, there's an opportunity to anticipate and address environmental impacts of cannabis going forward. Historically, research on cannabis has been quite limited due to its illegal status. However, this is now starting to change. So we did a systematic review of existing published research on the topic of cannabis and the environment. We specifically focused on studies demonstrating new empirical and quantitative evidence of the environmental impacts associated with cannabis. The review ended up identifying 28 studies that have been published since 2012. These studies document 6 pathways of environmental impact: land cover, water use, pesticide use, energy use, air pollution, and water pollution. Most of the current work on cannabis and land cover comes out of California, where cannabis systems actually have a small total land use footprint compared to other commodities. Outdoor farms tend to be located in remote places due to their historical legal status. This increases the risk of habitat fragmentation and wildlife disturbance from exposure to chemical, noise, air, or light pollution. You'll hear more on this in a little bit from Phoebe. Implementing land use planning strategies and wildlife-conscious farming practices that aim to mitigate these risks should be an important focus for the sector. So far, research suggests that cannabis has a small, although highly variable water use footprint compared to other agricultural crops. In drought-prone regions like California, cannabis cultivation poses risks as it may contribute to water stress through groundwater and stream flow depletion. This is something Ted will talk about in more detail in a bit too. Developing water license systems and working with producers to better manage the timing and location of water extraction could mitigate such risks. We found no published work on the environmental risks that arise from pesticide use in legal cannabis systems. There is, however, evidence of the use of highly toxic anticoagulant rodenticides in illegal trespass grows in Northern California. These pose threats to local wildlife species like fishers or owls. Developing cohesive pesticide use and testing standards and educational resources for farmers could help reduce environmental contamination risks. Some legislations, like California or Canada, have already started to pioneer policy solutions in this direction. Existing estimates from the US highlight that the energy use footprint from indoor and mixed light cannabis cultivation is much higher than that of other greenhouse crops. Cannabis is therefore likely to contribute to urban energy use and carbon emission budgets. Incentivizing best practices and monitoring energy use in legal facilities could contribute to reducing this impact. Results from pilot studies show that cannabis greenhouses emit particulate matter, also referred to as biogenic volatile organic compounds. These have been linked to ozone formation and odor pollution. More evidence is needed to assess the magnitude of these risks, especially in indoor production hotspots like Denver and Colorado. Still, prioritizing science-based best practices like carbon air filtration, for example, might mitigate future air pollution risks. There's a collection of research studies that have documented how cannabis compounds from human consumption, like CBDs or THCs, persist in urban wastewater effluents. There's also some experimental evidence that cannabis compounds negatively impact aquatic wildlife, but we currently don't know enough to derive conclusions about concrete risks in the wild. To conclude, there are clearly some substantial knowledge gaps about the environmental impacts of cannabis, and more wide-ranging research initiatives are needed to address this going forward. Still, research so far does point toward important risks of environmental harm associated with unregulated cannabis expansion. Addressing these risks will require forward-thinking and systemic policy strategies. Finally, the current expansion of cannabis markets may continue the stigmatization of certain actors, or may contribute to exacerbating social inequities. There is therefore a need to transition to a legal, equitable, and sustainable cannabis sector, which should draw on collaborative and science-based solutions.